When I was a child, we would frequently get calls from a woman named Tanya. It didn't seem like a big deal. She had the same last name as us, although it's quite common around here. When we moved across the city and phone books stopped being the go-to for finding someone's phone number, the calls for Tanya gradually stopped. Those days seemed to have ended and we carried on, forgetting about the mysterious Tanya. It was about 4 years ago that she popped up in our lives again. I was driving home from work one afternoon and was greeted with a pretty grisly car wreck at the turn to my house. Two cars had collided and one had wrapped itself around a sign pole that had the house numbers and directions on it, one of which was my house number. Several days later, we got a call from the police. They asked if Tanya was at this residence. Her car was found wrapped around a pole down the street from my house, and she was nowhere to be found at the accident site. We haven't heard anything about it since. This happened about 2 years ago to me, but it was pretty unsettling. I'll start by saying I used to have this shop that was in a building that was over 100 years old. It was split up into 3 different storefronts. I had one shop, my best friend had another, and then there was a third one rented out to another girl. One day, I'm at the shop when the phone rings. A man is on the other end of the line asking me for something or another and being really spacey. I'm trying to talk to him, but there are long pauses before his answers, and he is just being a little bit odd. Finally, I ask him something, and there is a long pause on the other end. Long enough to make me ask, "Hello?" because I thought he had hung up on me. Instead, he replies, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just having a hard time focusing on our conversation because there is a spirit standing next to you that is yelling into the phone, trying to get my attention." At this point, I'm intrigued and decide to play along. So I say, "Oh, really? What's he saying?" The psychic goes on to make a few broad comments about me and the space I'm in, all of which he could have easily found looking on our website, so I'm not impressed. He says the man has been in the building since the early 1900s and is infatuated with me. He has been following me for years and frequently tags along with me to my house, my friends' houses, and even places like the grocery store. Okay, that's interesting, but then it gets more so. He tells me the man is very jealous of the guy that I'm dating and doesn't like him because we are so close. He then goes on to say that the spirit hurt the guy I'm seeing when he was doing renovations on the building, which was actually 100% accurate, and that he didn't like that he was in his personal space changing it. So that was weird, but his next comment really bothered me. The psychic says, "And he's very glad you broke up with that army dude. He really hated him." Now this was weird to me. I had dated that guy about 3 years before, and he had been restationed right after we broke up and had never set foot in the building, nor had I seen him since we broke up. At the time of the phone call, I had only had my shop in the building for about 6 months, so I couldn't figure out how this spirit would know about him. The guy told me some other stuff, mostly of which was pretty basic, and then I finally got him off the phone because he was starting to get weird, and I just wasn't interested anymore. The whole conversation lasted about 15 minutes, and I was thoroughly creeped out by his couple of comments and couldn't figure out how he knew so specifically about the last 2 people I had dated. Then, it dawned on me. I had worked for about 6 months for my friend at her shop in this same building for some extra cash after I moved back to the city, which was about 4 years prior, and in the time that I had dated and broken up with this army guy, which would also explain why the psychic said the spirit had been following me for years. I no longer have the shop in that building, but still go there every now and then to see my friend. We both agree that the building has some bad vibes, especially at night. And there's a couple more weird things that had happened to me while I had the shop there. So I live in a pretty quiet part of my city, in a small 2-bedroom basement apartment with my roommate who is gone for the summer. I stayed here and worked during the summer. I don't get out all that often, and I don't know that many people, as I just moved here 2 years ago. Just this last Sunday night, I was doing my usual gaming with some friends I had met on the internet, good friends of mine that I had known since I was 16. When I get this call from a private number, now I rarely get phone calls from people I know, normally communication is just done by texting, so I pick it up, and what sounds like a man, maybe in his mid-40s, picks up the phone. The conversation went as follows. I answer, "Hello?" He responds, "Who is this?" I say, who is this?" He says, "It's Randy." I respond, "Sorry, Randy, you got the wrong number." Then I hang up. About 10 minutes later, he calls me again. So I thought, he must have just accidentally dialed my number again. I ignored it and thought nothing of it, continuing enjoying my time with my friends playing some games. By now it's about 9 or 9:30. Around 10 o'clock, I get the call again. Once again, I just ignored it. After all, I do not know anyone, and have never known anyone in my lifetime by the name of Randy, so it's pretty logical not to answer it. I'd just be wasting my time. About an hour and a half passes by. It's about 11 o'clock now. I get the call once again, so I answered it. And literally, the call goes exactly the same way as before, with one problem. I think I ended up saying too much. I pick up the phone and say, "Sorry, you really have the wrong number. I don't know any Randys." He says, "Oh, you don't know me?" I respond, "That's right." Here I'm thinking he finally gets it and he's gonna stop calling me, but then he says this. "Well then, I guess I'm gonna stop by, and I think you'll get a pretty good idea who I am when I'm done with you." At this point, I was instantly freaked out and just hung up. I was getting kind of scared, but I got a grip on myself and just figured that he must have had some beef with somebody and really doesn't get that he's calling the wrong person. A few minutes later, I hear a vehicle pull up into my driveway. Since I live in the basement and there's a window facing the driveway, his headlights were shining right in. I figured it was my neighbor coming home from his night shift at the hospital. A few minutes passes by and the lights are still on. Quickly it all came flooding back into my mind. "It's him," I thought, and my stomach began to knot, and I felt so afraid. My hands began to tremble. I peeked through the curtains and watched the car for quite some time. I couldn't tell if anyone was inside or not, since the headlights were so bright. He doesn't leave, so I call my brother who lives not far from me. I told him what had happened, and he says, "Okay, stay in your house, keep your doors locked, I'm coming over to get you." Now my brother is a pretty intimidating guy if you've never met him before. He's 6'4", broad shoulders, and overall just a big dude. He comes over and I let him in. He says there's nobody in the car, yet the headlights are on. I pack up some things and we head off. He was kind enough to let me stay at his place for a few days until I felt okay. Upon returning to my apartment today, the same vehicle was in the driveway. I started freaking out, but there's nobody in the car. I noticed blankets on all the seats. For some reason I looked in the opposite direction, right at my garbage bin, and something I noticed is in there. It has the words, "It's me" written on it. I quickly went into my apartment and locked the door. I took a shower, and when I got out, the car was gone. I got a call from a random guy whose voice didn't register in my mind. I said, "Who is this?" And he said, "Why do you want to know?" And I didn't answer because I thought he was playing some stupid joke on me. Now it gets freaky. This is either an amazingly well-timed coincidence or a stalker that got away and never returned. He suddenly said, "I can see you." I responded, "Not very original, nice try." And then a train went past my house. My house was right near a train track. And on the phone, I could hear the sound of a train passing at the same time. Then he hung up, and I never heard from him again. So this happened to me about 10 years ago. I was 25 years old and I had come to visit my parents out in the country for a few days because it had been a while since I've seen them. One day they had gone to the grocery store and I was at the house by myself. Right before I was going to get in the shower, I heard the phone ringing. I checked the area code on the caller ID and the first three digits were 666, followed by a generic number. I know this sounds a bit silly, but that was the actual number. When I picked up the phone, there was no one there, and after about a minute, whoever it was on the other line had hung up. I found this very strange, but I decided to shrug it off and got in the shower. Well, that night, I was laying in bed and watching TV with my parents sound asleep. I heard the phone ring again, and it was the same number that had called me earlier on in the day. I answered it after the first ring so my parents wouldn't wake up. I whispered into the phone, "Who the hell is this? What do you want?" A person on the other end of the line, who sounded elderly, replied with, "Why'd they let me die? Why'd they let me die, Lance?" I felt as if my heart was going to sink. How in the hell did this guy know my name? It couldn't have been any of my friends playing a prank on me. They didn't know my parents' number. It was the creepiest thing. After the elderly man said that, he just hung up. I was considering calling the number back or calling the police. But it was so late at night and I didn't want to scare my parents. I just waited for the number to call back, but I never received another call from that person again, and my parents never complained about getting weird phone calls after I left. One can only imagine what the hell that was all about. A prank, perhaps? But it was scary, and I was legitimately terrified.